Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Resilient Mind podcast with Andrew and Steve. I'm Steve Nathanson here with my good friend, Andrew Marangoni. Andrew, how are you doing today, my friend?
Fantastic. How are you doing today, my friend?
Good. As we were just talking, today is a good day. Being both Pittsburghers, it's a great day having the Steelers make the playoffs again. So with that, let's talk about expectations, because perhaps there was an expectation the Steelers wouldn't make the playoffs this year. And so I think it's a very apt topic about expectations. And as we get into it, as you wanted to make sure that we covered today, as well as expectations about processes that we have put in place. So with that, very similar to one of our last episodes about expectations and conditional thinking, we have expectations that go beyond, say, ourselves or other people, and to the things that are around us, like the processes that we see, or even our favorite sports team. And that can dictate how we feel. It can also dictate things that, say, cause inaction, because perhaps we expect too much and then they don't pan out that way and we stop trying. So really good discussion, I think, is on tap for us today about expectations. With that, my friend, I'll let you kind of take it away about expectations and processes, because you had a wonderful example I think you wanted to share. So the floor is yours.
Sure. Well, as as it goes, I work with people and their dogs. And in that vein, the expectation of that process is really, really skewed and confused a lot of the time. A lot of people, I hear every day people call me and they are telling me their pain points. And basically, I've come up with what I see as a big pattern, is that most of these people know what they could be doing or should be doing, or I don't like saying could be doing, because in any situation, it could look a number of different ways. But most of these people know what they could be doing. They just aren't practicing with the right intention behind it and looking at the expectation of what they are trying to get out of what they are doing, and having a mismatch and being very, very frustrated. And so I wanted to kind of look into the feelings and the emotions and building resiliency towards jumping into processes and understanding and managing the expectation of how much work am I actually putting in. All right. Because we talked last week about like exercise, because it was the first of the year. And this is something that, kind of goes for full circle with that is, once you show up to exercise, then eventually you have to start thinking about how you're exercising. Taking the step is, a good step, but just checking off the box of exercise is only going to get you so far. And just like that, working in any process is checking off the boxes will make you some progress, but will probably not meet your expectation of what you think this process is going to do for you. Usually you're going to have to dive into the mechanics and the daily practice of what you're doing, and then base that off of where I was at yesterday, and seeing progress that way, instead of being like, God, I'm not there yet. And I think you've talked about this, and I'm sure you're going to tie this into, running miles. But it's that I've gotten this much down instead of I still have this much to go, is a defeating, non-serving mentality in my mind.
Yeah, it's a good point, because I think you're bringing out a couple things, one of which is understanding what that process really looks like, so we can set reasonable and attainable expectations of what we want to achieve. There are a lot of great examples. We could talk about miles. One thing actually I want to bring up that was a recent conversation, which is maybe more applicable. Let's just, for example, say we're working in a plant floor setting. So it's manufacturing, could be vehicles, could be lumber, could be even food, that we're working in a factory floor setting. A lot of times we want to ensure that there's zero injuries on the job, right? We have zero reportable injuries. We see this in movies a lot where they've got this, say, zero injuries in the last 10 days calendar, or 15 injuries in the last 20 days, let's say. We see that a lot. So if we look at our processes here and our expectations, we may have this expectation of zero injuries this year on the job from the plant floor. Well, if we're at 10 injuries this year, or even worse, 10 injuries a week, is that zero number a reasonable expectation? Am I putting too much pressure on myself up front? Can I look at the processes and understand, well, what's leading to those injuries? What safety measures do we not have put in place? What are we causing our employees to go through, perhaps, that tends to cause those injuries or those incidents? Understanding that process or processes you can put into place to limit the risk factor and limit the injuries will help us ultimately get to zero. But if we just say, well, we're at 10 incidents every week and we need to get to zero, and we leave it there, we're going to be in a world of frustration, because we haven't truly addressed what it is that we need to address, or understood that process well enough to tailor back step by step to meet the expectation of getting down to zero, by saying, can I start bringing that back? Or can I understand this well enough to actually make that a feasible process and expectation? So something maybe a little bit more kind of common ground and relatable, because not everybody's running, as I would love to talk about a running example, but I wanted to provide something a little bit different today.
Sure. And I think what you're bringing out is that you really need to do a number of things when you're looking at processes and goals, or problem solving, I should say, is if you are trying to eliminate problems, you need to make sure that you are tackling it from a root cause instead of a symptomatic cause, right? So if, for instance, if the problem is, throw out a problem, Steve.
All right, this is gonna be fun. Let's say the problem in our business is low performance.
There you go. That's a good one. Now, if it's low performance, that's definitely a symptom, not a mechanical error. That is not, low performance comes from usually low motivation, or unclarity of processes, right? So we could start diving in there. Is how am I treating my people, and how are they responding to the way I'm treating them? Now, if that all looks in order, then I would start looking at the mechanics. All right, now, is it a process in, actual manufacturing, or going through the mechanics of the process? It at some point, actually, where this falls in very nicely is in a book called The Practice of Practices. Okay. It's actually written by a musician, but it holds firm in so many different areas. But he looks at it this way: is when something comes up, basically kind of goes through this checklist of, is this a internal or external problem? And then he kind of looks at it as, is this a chronic problem or an acute problem? Does this just pop up, or is this something that happens all the time? And then he keeps diving into layer, into layer, into layer. And I think that's what you really need to do when you're problem solving anything, or, looking at the value of the process you're doing, is how much bang for the buck am I getting? That's a good question. Is how much of this process am I enduring for the results I'm getting? And are those results within that breach of expectation that I was originally thinking of? And to get a good gauge of that, I should probably talk to some other people who've engaged in something similar, so that I can make sure that's realistic too.
Yeah, and it's an element, I think, of forced expectations that we are perhaps putting on others, or in this instance, a process that's put into place. And there's two things that stand out to me actually on this that I want to share. I think one is the quote unquote definition of an insanity, right? Is doing something over and over and again and expecting a different result. Are we trying to force a square peg into a round hole? Another way of commonly saying that. The other thing that came to mind, and I won't ruin the show for those who haven't watched it. It is actually a phenomenal show, Ted Lasso on Apple. I wholly agree with why it's won all the Emmys. I think it is fantastic, just as a quick aside. But in it, there is this common trap that an individual falls into at one point of essentially putting forth a scheme for the soccer team to use or a process. And when it's not executed, essentially saying, well, it's not the scheme, it's not the process, it's their failure to be able to do it. Honestly, I share that because that's a very common thing, whether it's on that show or in the real world in our own businesses and us as leaders leading other people. We may put into place something that we feel is definitely going to work and trying to force fit people into it and then get angry or upset when it doesn't work. This expectation of this process, this is the right way to do it. This is how we have to do it. This is the way it should be done. Deal with it. Why can't you guys just do what I tell you to do? We can fall into that trap because we expect from this process a certain result. That process may work very well. It may have worked very well, but we have to consider people as well. Is it truly the right thing for our people that we currently have? Or to your point, Andrew, do I understand my people enough? Have I talked to them enough? Have I built enough value in this? Have I addressed them versus just forcing something upon them? And have I really got their buy-in and their engagement to fully undergo this process and lead us to where we think it's going to lead us? Because I may have the greatest process in the world, but if I have people unwilling to go through it, it's not going to happen. So there is that expectation that we have on what results we're going to achieve because we think this is the right way to do it, which often forgoes actually getting people's buy-in to do it. And I think that's a critical element we're bringing out in terms of these expectations is, have I addressed everything that's truly going to make that successful and reach those expectations?
Right. And they brought this up in 60 Minutes last night with the workforce and how there's been a huge seismic shift in the way that people look at employment, working for other people, how we make money in this day and age. And, there is a lot of corporate thinking in that expectation that, like, why aren't people just coming back to the way it was? Like, it was working for us.
Yeah.
And they weren't looking deep into the fact that it's not just they were being paid to stay home. Is the majority of workers in the United States are very unappreciated. And,
Right.
the days of you're lucky to have this job are kind of over. Like, it's now you're lucky to have an employee like me. And, that expectation on from the employees wanting more and looking at it that way, and also the shift that the employers are going to have to make and learning that their expectation of it just coming back to normal is not going to happen, and what they need to change and shift to make what they have built sustain. Because all things take maintenance. Like, nothing is just created and then just exists forever.
Yeah. You're illustrating one of the things I think we've talked about before in this program, which is, and it's a hard thing to do until we get accustomed to it. Can I be self-reflective and introspective enough to say, what is it that I've done that contributes to this? What's on me and what can I control? To your point about corporations, what are we doing that leads to this? The great resignation is real. I could have told you that was going to happen 2 years ago when I saw how much burnout there was at the beginning of the pandemic and how employers didn't care. to your point, a shift has happened. This is what is our quote unquote new normal. This is where we are now. And we do need to look introspectively to say, what is it that I've done that has perhaps led to this? And where's my expectations of processes and others going awry? And how have I led to that? It is a tough thing to do, but it's a powerful thing to do because it will free us and help us find that right pathway forward to set the relevant expectations.
Yeah. And what you're talking about is being 100% responsible.
Yeah.
And, you know, Peter Parker's uncle had that great quote, with great power comes great responsibility. But you can also say with great responsibility comes great power. Because with responsibility, you have the power to say that I can change, make a difference, create, versus I can't, won't, am the victim to.
Yeah.
And we have been shown that we live in a world that is prospectively ours. And when you take the 100% responsibility approach, you have so much more power to influence your life in what you want, instead of, you know, being in scarcity and always thinking that it's not enough and I have to protect what little I have.
Yeah. And I feel as leaders, it's a worthwhile exercise to actively explore our expectations. What is it that I've expected of others? What is it that I've expected of these processes? And are they meeting my expectations? If they are, that's great. If they're not, that's where what we're talking about can come into play. Are they no longer realistic, what I'm expecting? Are they realistic? And there's things that have derailed them from being it. And it may not truly say be on us or things that we've done. We have to be objective about that versus subjective. But they're good questions. And as we constantly evaluate that, we'll be able to vet this out, versus one day waking up and going, nothing's working, nothing's going on right, nothing is meeting my expectations, I don't know what's going on. Things tend to boil up until they explode and get to that point, and we feel that frustration and that anger. But if we actively constantly take it upon ourselves to revisit the expectations and ask these kind of questions, then we start vetting these out earlier, and we start being able to see those shifts that we can put in place to tweak those expectations back to where they need to be, or tweak the processes, tweak how we approach individuals. And then we can achieve so much more, because not only are we constantly evaluating what we're doing, but we're also constantly evaluating how we're doing it to get the best results that we can.
Right. And, you know, I think another thing that you're kind of bringing out is that objective look and being unattached to the expectations, right? Like, it's fine to set them, but like when you are attached to them, like it needs to go this way or it means something else. It doesn't always mean something else. Like, those are the stories you're telling yourself about how you feel about those expectations.
Right.
So just being unattached is, this is my intention, this is what I want. But if it doesn't go that way, why did it not go that way? And look at it, you know, from that biased standpoint, to actually try to get some objective view, instead of maybe going into self beat up or into denial. Right? Is it's not me, it's you.
Yeah. And are the expectations clear to that point? Right. It's not me, it's you. Have those expectations been clearly stated and written and understood by all parties involved, whether it's processes, whether it's performance? That's one thing that's very often clear, because we don't necessarily always voice those expectations. And even when we do, we don't necessarily ensure clear understanding of others for those expectations. So one quick side, sorry, I'll turn it over to you. Right. Here's one way of getting over that. It's called three-way communication when we're talking to other people about expectations. I could say, something like this. Hey, Andrew, the next time that we run a class on this, what I would love to see is X, Y, and Z. And I think this is going to help us, right, achieve those results that we want. So I would like us to run it in this fashion. In that case, Andrew could repeat back to me and say, Steve, what I've heard there was this. And I said, yeah, that's correct. Yes, thank you. You got it beautifully. Or I say, no, I think, and I apologize, maybe I misquoted something. Here's what I meant in that. I have that opportunity to either confirm that, yes, what Andrew repeated back was right and what I intended, or tweak it and present the small adjustment to what he said. And we ensure through that three-way communication, I say something once, Andrew repeats it back, and then I confirm or adjust it. Each step of that way is 1, 2, 3. Three-way communication can help us ensure clarity of what is said and what expectations are of people. So just a real quick tip for our audience of how we can make sure clarity does exist around them.
Right. And I think also going back and reevaluating the realisticness of like how jobs are written and then how jobs are performed, because I've never worked at a place where my job performed like it was written in the handbook. So, that's a good place to have clarity, is just, hey, the book says this, you're telling me this. I just want to be clear that you want me to do the latter. Right. And that is not something a lot of people practice. A lot of people don't like when they don't understand something, they just shake their head. And that's a big opening for unclarity. So if you say to somebody, are you clear on what I said? And they shake your head, you might want to ask them, what did I just ask from you?
Right.
In your own words, just so I can be clear.
Yeah. So I think today so far, I think there's two main things that we've really brought out when we talk about expectations kind of in general, and then in processes. Are they realistic? Have we adjusted to the times? That's kind of bucket number one I see. Bucket number two is setting up for the clarity and understanding of those so that they can be executed upon. Meaning, have we clearly expressed them? Have we given people or the system what it needs to be able to meet those expectations? Curious to see if you think I missed anything in there, but that's kind of what stands out to me in terms of the two little buckets essentially that we've touched upon today.
Yeah, it sounded clear to me, Steve.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Nice three-way communication there, my friend. One other thing to put out there is there's a difference between want and expectations. What I mean by that is I may want to be, and I'm now going to bring in athletics, I may want to be at a certain pace for running. Let's say I want to run a marathon at a 7-minute mile pace. This is what I want. And I work hard towards it. And I may expect that I am at that point. And maybe this season it turns out, you know what, I'm not. Let's say. There is that difference between expectations and want. I often can set my want at too high of a level and then cause, because I've expected to be at that level, frustration and anger and disappointment and resentment, or this is never going to happen. We can go down these non-serving spirals because we've essentially set those expectations too high, tied to something we want, versus saying, this, I do want to get to that, say, 7-minute per mile pace for a marathon. What is reasonable to show growth year after year? And when can I expect to get to that level, right? If you're running a marathon at a 10-minute mile pace currently, that's a very big jump. So I may want to be at a certain level, and I may attach my expectations to that naturally, because that's where I want to be. But what is that reasonable set point for the expectation this year, this quarter, 2 years from now, 3 years from now? So I just share that because I feel like that's one other factor that we as human beings will impose upon our expectations because they come from deep-seated wants that we have.
Right. And, the want is the vision. Right. Is this is what I want. This is what I foresee. The expectation of getting there needs to be based on the practice. Is what progress have I made? What am I engaging in? Is this moving me towards my goal or not?
Yeah.
How much sacrifice versus how much gain? All these little pieces of, it's just little nuances of what am I doing? Is it driving me towards the vision?
Yeah. Now, there's some people out there who are going to say, like, I'm the idea person, right? I don't necessarily like to plan. I just kind of like to wing it. And I will say, as a coach, I worked with all kinds of different people, and we have different planning styles, right? Some people are very analytical, plan out processes and step by step and chunk out their calendars by 15 minutes. That's not me. I can't do it to that degree. I do like a plan and a process, but not to that degree. Now, there are other folks who are just kind of go by the seat of their pants, right? They kind of wing it. Oh, here's what I want to achieve. And they just have this very broad, overarching, say, goal or expectation or want. Even if we're on that far extreme, there's still value in asking us that question of, if this is what I want, what can I reasonably expect? If it's not serving for me to break it down into very small chunks and to be very analytical about it, the question still remains the same of, is that reasonable of my expectation for, say, this year? If that's my goal, I want to eat better and lose weight this year. If that's where I want my goal to be and that what works best for me, great. But the rule still applies of, am I putting too much on me, regardless of the plan of action that's put in place? And I just share that because I know there's folks who are going to be listening to this that have all different types of planning styles. And we've typically talked about one, which is, right, that very kind of analytical step-by-step approach. Even if we're not that way, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, there's still value in asking that question of, yes, this is something I want, but what's the reasonable expectation for the time frame I'm thinking about, and being honest with myself about it.
Right. And, it's funny because I'm definitely a seat of the pants kind of guy. Like that's how I roll. I barely even have a calendar, right? At this point, I leave my schedule open to my clients. Is like, here's when I'm willing to work. You can schedule with me when you want. Like, that's how I plan. And it's very serving for me. And at the end of the day, I know that I'm making progress and I'm meeting my expectations through that system that I created that is very fly by the seat of your pants, but it works. And I got to that place by constantly evaluating what I was doing and what I wanted, and found alignment is basically, what I was looking for, is the right combination of intention and practice. That's it. It looks different for everyone, but I mean, for instance, you want to add a little bit of exercise into your life, at any given moment when you're just standing around, you can do 10 squats. And that is that much more towards doing something, right? Like a few little bit of mobility exercises throughout the day changes your life. You just need to be aware enough to do it. You don't have to write it down. You don't have to plan. You don't have to buy any special equipment. You just have to know, in this moment, I can choose to move a little bit. That's it.
Yeah.
And, if you can master that kind of little bit of adding value and process to your overall wants in life every day, that's really how you make investments into that overall what you want.
Yeah. And there's value in that, because it again comes down to us being kind of honest and setting reasonable expectations with ourselves around what that process would look like. Let's say for us in this example, you're talking about doing 10 squats a day, that may be tied to that goal of getting in better shape. If I can just get 1% better every single day, I'm going to reach that goal. If I can set that intention to build in those 10 squats, when I have the ability to do that, I can reach those goals. But if I say I need to go from being able to do 0 squats to 100 squats, we've set our expectations too high. So in that, maybe today I can only do 7. Can I allow the fluidity there to let myself know that this is what's reasonable? And I think that's a big thing that comes into play. We may not know what is that reasonable expectation when we put ourselves into that process or upon a goal that we have. Can I be okay with feeling that out as I take steps towards it? It may be 7 squats, it may be 8, it may be 15 as it turns out, and that's okay. And I'll give you a natural illustration. I was talking to a friend this weekend on things I want to accomplish in my business, and they asked, well, when is that going to happen? And I paused because honestly, I didn't know. I don't know. This is something new that I'm venturing into. So my answer to them was, well, I think what I understand is typically it's about a 6-month cycle for something like this to happen, but I can't answer your question yet because I need to get in there, take it step by step and see what is that reasonable expectation for me. I've got to learn that. In the absence of the known, we tend to make assumptions and we tend to make too much of a leap and too high of expectations. So I just share that because I think you've brought out a great point. And I think this was something else that ties into that point of, if I'm not quite sure what the expectation should be, can I set a goal and then see what's actually reasonable as I take action towards that, and then reevaluate that expectation as I go along?
Yeah, so we've talked about like being realistic, meeting yourself where you're at, and creating a baseline and going from there, right? Because again, in a process, if getting in shape were everyone's end goal, and we looked at the country right now, everyone's at a different starting point. So where are you at? And then are you making progress? Right? Is how your process looks against somebody else's process. It's not always going to look the same. Sometimes it will. It depends on what you're engaging in. Sometimes it looks very similar. Sometimes it looks completely different. The important thing is that you are engaging in the process, and at some point you are seeing progress and value.
Yeah. And
sometimes it comes out mysteriously. And I recently have been on the Cobra Kai kick and watching, all the nostalgia from my Karate Kid days.
Yep.
But that's a perfect example is, all the things Mr. Miyagi taught Daniel's son, all the chores he thought he was doing, he was actually learning karate. Right. And he didn't understand, but he was invested in the process. And the next thing he knew, he was like good at it. Now we always get, bamboozled by movies, and we all wish that the 80s montage was a thing that could happen in real life, where you go from 0 to hero within one song.
Right.
You make all the progress, and then you're just like, yeah.
Right.
But it doesn't look like that. That's unrealistic movie expectation, right?
Yeah.
But in that montage, they are outlining that it is a process and it would look like this. They're just saving time in the story.
Yeah.
So, because no one likes to watch people practice, because you start bad and you slowly get better. People like to watch people rehearse once they're good.
Well, yeah. And, you're bringing to mind another saying about the journey. We hear this all the time, but I don't know how much it really sinks in with a lot of us is you got to enjoy the journey. Because the end result ultimately, yes, is where we're striving to get to, and there's satisfaction in meeting that. But the vast majority of that time is not spent actually achieving that result. It's spent on the journey to get there, right? In an Ironman race, it's a long, long day. You know, folks may be out there for 12 hours, 14 hours, 16 hours doing it. And yes, that's a long time to be out there and engaging it. But that pales in comparison to the number of hours that you put into training for that. Let's just say on average, you spend 10 hours a week training. You know, for the past year, that's 520 hours versus 12 hours or 16 hours. There's worth in stopping to smell the roses, worth in enjoying the journey. And when we become more in tune with that journey, as you're talking about, we see greater value in it. We enjoy the process more, and we overcome this hurdle of this downward non-serving spiral that we can get caught up in because we're not achieving things as quickly as we expected to achieve them. We've put too much emphasis on that end goal and not given credence to that journey to get there.
Right. And, you know, I think another distinction right there is when you get in that moment, why is it that when we fail, we are like, well, then I'm totally giving up instead of re-examining.
Right.
It's like, I tried that. You know what? Baby bathwater. It's all gone.
Yeah.
You know, I think the resilient person, the resilient mind says, what went wrong and how can I make it better this attempt? And staying dedicated to the process. And that is what makes us resilient and what makes us, you know, it gives us that power to create and be more than just victims to our circumstances.
Yeah. If I were to sum this up, this whole episode up in one quick phrase, I would say to master our expectations is to constantly evaluate them.
Yes. And to master ourselves is to constantly evaluate ourselves.
Yeah.
I look forward to a year of mastery with you, my friend.
Yeah. To that point, I'll share one other saying that I've started to use because I think it's very, very, very relevant to exactly what we're talking about here, which is master your mindset to master everything else.
Yes. And let your power explode. You could do it, people. We're here to help.
Yeah.
We're here for support. You know, send us a call, send us a message. You know, we'd love to hear what you think about these conversations, how it's served you. You know, and if it has, share it with a friend.
To that, when you evaluate your expectations, you will master them. You will create more serving thoughts and feelings in your life, and you will create greater achievement and success and accomplishment as well. So until the next time, let's take a moment and reflect back upon the expectations we've set.